A very good afternoon and welcome to this seemingly very important conversation. My name is Melane and I once again have the pleasure of hosting this dialogue. We are living in the midst of mayhem, some would argue, anarchy, some have decided to call it. I'm calling it conflict and unfortunately opportunistic criminality that we're seeing playing itself, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng. It all started, of course, in response to what was the right thing, which is to send former President Jacob Zuma to prison for being in contempt of a constitutional court order. And I absolutely applaud the response, certainly by the South African administration and the criminal justice system, to say no one, whether you're a domestic worker or a former president, is above the law. What has happened over the last 6 days, though, has just been unbelievably disheartening and disappointing to watch. To see South Africans going out in their numbers to go and cause destruction and mayhem in the manner and the way that they have really has been heartbreaking in many ways. And yes, while it's easy for us to respond hysterically to what is happening and blame all manners of things, what we do need to deeply reflect on is the fact that this is a systemic issue in South Africa. Had we addressed certain things decades ago, we would not possibly be finding ourselves in the situation that we are in right now. And of course, our topic this month is around youth unemployment. We know that they are the most affected by the socioeconomic challenges in this country. We know that if we do not address it and address it soon, this is a ticking time bomb. And I think the last 6 days have really showed itself in that way. So what was meant to be a conversation around solutions has immediately, suppose, improved in importance. And I'm looking forward to the speakers that we've invited for you here today to engage on this very important topic of the youth unemployment crisis. Throughout, we will be inviting you to please share with us your questions for any of the guests. We will allocate a little bit of time at the end of each of the presentations to ask questions, and then there'll be some more time at the end of the hour and a half for those questions to be entertained. I'd love for you to really deeply reflect on what you think are the possible solutions to what is a real challenge in South Africa. Solutions that are possibly immediately implementable, that are measurable, and that you believe will have an impact in addressing this very important issue in a South African context. We've got, of course, Erica, as well as Nikki, joining us from the Cape Design Institute, as well as, Craft Design Institute, as well as the Dutch Consulate, who are sitting with me in the studio at the Desmond and Leah Tutu Foundation office, who will be reflecting on some of the presentations and, as always, painting the way forward. Start us off this afternoon is a wonderful economist, strategist, and thought leader. She's a recognized leading economist, business person, social activist, strategist, and thought leader, a professor of Fourth Industrial Revolution practice at the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Miriam Altman, it's lovely to have you here. Yours is a purpose of laying the land, if you like, and just painting a very comprehensive picture in the time allocated to you of what the challenges are and hopefully what the potential solutions are. It's lovely to have you here, Miriam. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Am I clear?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
You can hear me okay? Okay. So I'm going to try to keep to time. I'm depending on you to help me, if that's okay. Okay. Yes, and I don't have a PowerPoint. You'll be happy to know. I'm sure you'll have plenty of them today. And that's a design choice. So the first thing I want to say is you're linking the youth question with what's going on in ransacking malls and the Zuma response, the so-called Zuma response. And I just want to start, it's not mainly what I'll talk about, but I can't express strongly enough how I feel that those things should be separated. And I really supported President Ramaphosa's approach when he spoke to the nation about it. Poor people are not criminals. And the idea that many rich people are, as we know, from state capture and Steinhoff and so on, and some poor people are. But to say, well, you know, people are poor and desperate, and therefore they're ransacking the malls, I find very troubling. I think most people, my starting point anyway, and I don't have any evidence to show you other than life experience, and the activities of people around the country that say, no ways, not in my community. These are people who are criminal. And I was just on a program with Jackie Cilliers, who was saying that, very unsurprising to me, that many of the people who are doing this are in the same communities where there is violent service delivery protests, as an example. So the first thing I hope that you'll do today is to separate those things out. We have a long-standing problem with unemployment. We've had Black African unemployment being over 20% since the late 1970s. This is not a problem of the past decade. This is a structural problem that has continued. It's been a problem that's been in place. A lot of my writing is more about stasis than it is about, we're suddenly going into decline. You're talking about this kind of violence, but in Cape Town, there's taxi wars going on right now, and the taxi industry is effectively shut down. So, that's the country we're in. Is this kind of thing? And please don't conflate it with the youth and with the poor. That's what I would beg you to do. Just, up to you, but I just feel that I have to say that. Okay, so I wrote an article recently in the Sunday Independent, and I've been writing about this for years. I have a website, miriamaltman.com, that has loads of publications. I've been doing work on youth to say, how do you activate youth? I've been doing it for years. And but I was invited, I think, today because I published an article in Sunday Independent last week. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, and it focused on the youth unemployment question. And again, I was asking the question, I've been hearing a lot of people saying, this country, it's going to the dogs, 75% of youth are unemployed, and technically, I guess it's correct in that 74% of youth between the age of 15 to 24 are unemployed by the broad definition. But it's a very meaningless statement because most youth in that age group are in school of some sort. They're in education. It's the wrong way to think about it. And one of the things I've tried to do over the years when I work on unemployment, which is an extremely big problem in this country, there's no doubt about it, but it doesn't help to blow it up to something that it's not. What that does is it just distracts you. In the same way that when people say, well, this country's blowing, it's like, I don't know what planet you're on, but if you live in this country and you don't know that there's violence, service delivery protests that become violent, taxi wars, et cetera, then, I don't know, maybe you just woke up. Seriously. So I'm not trying to say that it's fine that people are ransacking malls. Of course, it's terrible. But let's be real. We have an ethics problem in this country that needs to get dealt with, and much stronger leadership, and we need to be dealing with a violent society. But it's not like it started with Zuma going to jail, So, okay. So similarly, so we live in a violent society, and that comes from the apartheid history that we haven't dealt with. That marginalized families, separated families, created hostels. It created a violent society and dislocated society and communities that were broken. That is the violence problem. And then we have had leaders that have enabled corruption and major ethical lapses, which is not the way to get that under control, and very limited nation building. That's the essence of the societal problem. But if we want to deal with youth, the issue is it's not getting the numbers right, because 74% youth unemployment is technically correct. But very few young people are actually in the labor market. So it's extremely misleading and not helpful at all to have this crisis mindset that says 75% of youth are unemployed. The problem is very big. You don't have to make it worse than it is. So now, how do I think about it? The first thing to know is that 65% of young people between the age of 15 and 24 are actually in education of some sort. Remember, you're talking about 15-year-olds, you're supposed to be in school, right? 15, 16, 17, 18, maybe 19. You're in school, or you're in FET college, or you're in tech or some kind of post-school education opportunity. That's over 6 million people. Then you have what are called NEETs, people who aren't in education or training or whatever. And about 32% of that group, so it's about 3 million people, fall into that group. But then remember that some people don't want to be active. Maybe they've just had a baby, or there are a whole host of reasons. But generally speaking, when you think of 15 to 24-year-olds, you want people who are active and doing something that gets them on a track to the future. And the work we did in the National Planning Commission, we published a number of very useful reports, I hope, on our website. And they all looked at the pathway, because the most important way of thinking about youth and what you do about it is about the pathway, is not what are they doing today, but are they doing something, or do they have access to opportunity that can enhance the probability of working and having a livelihood in future, and hopefully some kind of earnings trajectory that grows over time. That's what that's what you have to worry about, not feeling disempowered that 74% of youth are unemployed. That is not actually the situation. The situation is you've got 6 million people already in the system to work with. That is an enormous opportunity that was not there 20 years ago. We know this, right? So there's a huge opportunity. Is the quality of TVET where it needs to be? No. Is, so much of it needs to be fixed. But the reality is there's a huge opportunity in the fact that millions of young Black, and particularly young Black kids, are in some kind of education opportunity. That means they're still in the institutional fold. That is an incredible opportunity that was, again, not there 20 or 25 years ago. So now, what needs to happen? Number one, the economy needs to grow. I mean, all of the youth interventions, they don't particularly help. They can help a little, and we should do them, but they don't help very much if the economy itself is not growing. That is just fundamental. So when people say we're going to create 3 million jobs, I don't know, how does that work when the economy's losing jobs? And employers would prefer to hire over 35-year-olds. So how does it work that 1 million youth will be employed by some program? It just can't work, right? So the first thing is that the economy needs to grow. But in the meantime, what can we do? There's loads that can be done. Whether it helps you now or whether it helps us in future when hopefully the economy is growing. Because part of the way to think about this is not having an exact match today, but it's about having a youth population that's ready for the future. That is a really critical way of thinking about this. So I spoke about 5 things and I'll get through them. I think I've got a few minutes.
Miriam?
I'm okay for time? Okay. So number 1, the fact is 6 million young people are in some kind of education situation, school, post-school education, training, something. So the first thing is to ensure that they complete and hopefully get some kind of certificate. Most people who are unemployed don't have a secondary school certificate. In other words, a matric. Now, maybe government will introduce a grade 9 leaver certificate. That used to be plenty. But, a grade 9 is a very good base of education if you've got a good technical college sector. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually very appropriate and something that's very common globally. And part of the problem of what we have is we don't have any kind of school leaver certificate prior to matric. And then a high quality technical and vocational sector. That is a big solution down the road. And that's what a lot of countries do. And that's probably more appropriate for the kind of jobs that are in the economy for most people than thinking you need to have a matric and then move on from there. So a high quality grade 9 certificate would be absolutely fine. We think it's very small, but actually a lot of people, factory workers and paraprofessionals and so on, paraprofessional nurses and so on, historically used to have a very good grade 9. Like in the Black population, it was called something else, standard something, standard 6, I think it was. And then they would have a very good technical, whatever it was on top of that. So the first thing, and I wrote an article last year just to indicate to people in Daily Maverick last year about post-school education. And the issue here is then, so you've got these people in the system, make it work. We've got a lot of kids now from low-income communities that are getting diploma passes, for example, in matric. More than half of diploma passes, the people who qualify for university from matric are now from quintile 1, 2, and 3 households, poor households. That is an incredible opportunity. Now, that's an improvement over the past decade. So, that opportunity was not there 10 years ago. So now the issue is make it work. Make sure those kids, I'm just giving an example, but that is an unbelievable opportunity to pull families out of poverty. Because if you can make sure that those kids, you keep that ratio going and improve on it, you make sure those kids get into good opportunities, get some career guidance, you make sure they get into the next level of institution and whatever funding they need, you make sure that they finish and get channeled into work. That's not a small project in this country, given the way communities function right now. But that is much easier to do than the original thing that had to be done, which was to get them into the education system in the first place, right? That is definitely within our power to do. And that can be done across the line. I'm only giving one example. 2, and I'll go faster. So 1 is make the fact that 6 million kids are in, I still think of an under 24-year-old as a kid, young adults are making it through the system. You have these people in the system. That is an unbelievable opportunity. And we have to make it work. And I'm not so sure that we always do. There's a very high dropout rate, as we know. That is like 50% dropout rate from university, which is such a waste once you've got people into the institution. And that is something one could do something with. 2, the public employment programs are veering more towards community care. And so like the teacher aid story that the presidency engaged in for a few months this year was, I think, a huge success. It brought in 300,000, got people a little bit active. Those people could be leveraged now. The CRAM study showed that there were maybe 500,000 kids who fell out. Bring those kids back from in the teacher aid program and get them to fan out into communities and make sure that kids get back to school, right? So that's the idea of where the public employment programs are going. That's something that I've also been very engaged with over the years to get it more focused out of construction and into community-based services, strengthening CBOs, et cetera. I mean, it's a very hard thing to do, but that is definitely where the program's going and a huge opportunity in this regard. 3, the employment tax incentive, the ETI. It's a tax incentive that subsidizes youth employment for 24 months. I've always felt that program, that nonprofits could use that program legally. The program does allow it, but I don't think many do or any do. And the tax incentive is in respect of PAYE. You don't have to be a taxable corporate tax. It comes off the employee income tax, or the PAYE. So that they get it. The firm gets the money back through that channel. And I think that there should be a drive to get nonprofits onto that. Is 3. 4, better active labor market policy like matching programs. So Harambee, I think, is an excellent example of that kind of thing. And I think that it's probably the most successful program with the kind of innovation. They took a lot of time on design, which I think is incredibly important, because youth programs globally generally don't work. I hate to say it, but they generally don't have that much impact. And it doesn't mean you don't want to do it, but what it means is you've really got to design them carefully to find out what works. And Harambee did that. Now, other kinds of things that I was suggesting were things like voucher programs, which have been used very well around the world. And what that means is instead of or additional to giving maybe an employee tax incentive to a company, you might attach a voucher to the young person. So let them go to which education institution they want to go to and show up, or go to a job, a place where they could work and present themselves with this voucher. So the voucher goes with the young person rather than the entity looking for a young person. You see what I mean? And that's the kind of thing we could try to do. You could even link it to the social grants system, things like that. They're innovations. And I should say that actually, I also wrote a paper about this for social development many years ago about how the system of social grants could be leveraged to do that kind of thing. Because then you can identify the young person through that. You know they're from a poor community. And then lastly, most young people work in services industries. Very few young people get employed in manufacturing and those kinds of activities. So, I mean, most people, period, work in these kinds of services. But young people particularly almost completely only find jobs in these areas. So like hospitality, tourism, retail, leisure, like anything like that. Mostly face-to-face services. So what does that mean? COVID affects it very badly, is the first thing. It specifically kills youth jobs, jobs for women and youth. It particularly is biased against succeeding in that regard. So making sure right now that we are keeping to protocols is actually incredibly important. And as much as wearing a mask and so on is extremely annoying, losing jobs is even more annoying. And in the early days, I often would say, go to a restaurant and I could see they're wearing their mask at half-mast. And I'd say, guys, I'm coming to your restaurant, wear your mask, save your jobs. We don't want to have another lockdown, and they'd put the mask up, they get it, right? But we've got to make that connection in people's minds as to how important it is to keep these protocols up even after we've been vaccinated. And then all the kinds of activities that make sure that those kinds of sectors are stimulated. So for example, getting the e-visas moving. Now, right now it may seem academic, but in a year's time, we want that system in place. And the fact that we don't have the e-visas and we have so many challenges in tourism and all of these sectors is a huge issue. Now, also in relation to the retail story, like just coming back to your original point, having retailers attacked right now is just a huge problem. These are zones where this is where youth work, as packers, as cashiers, whatever. That's where kids get their first job and maybe their only job. So we have to make that connection in our mind when we see what's happening with the violence, when we see tourism isn't progressing, et cetera. It's not a random thing. That is actually where most people work, and we should be stimulating it, making it safe, et cetera. So
Miriam, I'm going to come in now.
I hope that's helpful. Yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Partly as a check on time, but also I do want to pose one or two questions. Thank you very much for that, by the way. It was comprehensive in the time we allotted you, and more importantly, focus more on opportunities, which is something that we forget to do sometimes, right? We are often so bogged down by the challenges because I have a 7-year-old nephew who is in school at the moment. I constantly wonder, are we preparing that 7-year-old for what is a future employment opportunity that we don't even know of right now, right? It hasn't been created where he's going to be employed. And I absolutely agree with you. There are 6 million opportunities, as you say. Back in the day, the earlier sort of certificate that allowed you to exit before you got to matric was called the junior certificate. And with that, you could go to a teacher's college, you could go to a nurse's college, you could go to a technical college where then you go to earn a little bit more of the skills that are required. How do we shift the paradigm in South Africa to make that attractive again? Because I know that the Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Nzima, for example, is very passionate about vocational training. And it seems that we as a community are just not shifting along and appreciating that getting a grade 9 and then going into an artisanal specialized skill set that you get taught at a college, that actually might be more prospective for you than, going to matric and forcing your way into university.
Well, firstly, there is a debate. There's been a longstanding debate about whether to bring in the grade 9 certificate, leaving certificate. There's a lot of debates, pros and cons in relation to that, is the first thing. The second thing is that, the numbers in TVETs have dramatically increased. As you know, the enrollments, I think it's over 700,000 people right now are in TVETs. But we know that the quality is struggling. People will start to believe, firstly, a lot of people do because they're in there, but people will start to believe in it when it starts to produce results that lead to well-paying jobs. So the first thing is that you have to have some kind of mechanism that works. And then secondly, you need to have a big program to promote it. There's lots of countries that have gone through this process where people believe that university was the important thing. And then government had a major role to make people realize that going to tech and that kind of thing was a very good pathway. But there has to be a credible path for people to believe it.
And I suppose a systems question: who sets that path? Is it an administration that has a vision that says in 20, 30, 50 years' time, this is where we are seeing economic opportunities for growth, so therefore let's instruct basic education and higher education to start preparing our kids, our young adults, for that future? Or is it something that the market is going to be driving?
Well, the market can never be, when you want your whole population to move in a particular direction, the government does play a very important role. So one of the key recommendations of the National Planning Commission in relation to this whole area is most certainly stronger partnerships. One of the problems that we face is that there really is not this hand-in-glove relationship around curriculum and teaching and getting appropriate results from technical and higher education. So there's no doubt that there needs to be more of a partnership. But the state's got to set the tone and the drumbeat.
Indeed. Miriam, thank you very much for your insights. I do know that you have to leave us for your next meeting. It really, really has been most insightful, your reflections with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Miriam Altman there, of course, a recognized leading economist, business person, social activist, strategist, as well as thought leader. And you can go to miriamaltman.com for many of the papers and the articles that she was referencing there. Now, the National Youth Development Agency is an agency that's been around for quite some time. It's meant to work alongside, I imagine, both government and civil society and business communities in creating opportunities for young people. We're lucky enough to be joined by its chief executive, Waseem Carrim. Waseem, lovely to have you here. You listened to Miriam a moment ago, reflecting where the opportunities are lying. I imagine part of your role as a CEO of the agency is to realize those opportunities for young people, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks so much, Africa. And I think thank you to the Creative Exchange for the opportunity this time. And I'm really not going to, in my presentation, try and repeat anything that Miriam has said. I think she set such a wonderful context of where we see ourselves, but also where the opportunities lie. And I think we know that unemployment and youth unemployment was a crisis even before COVID-19, right? And I think we know that there are challenges both on the supply side and the demand side, which then manifests itself in very high levels of youth unemployment. And as much as there's been interventions by government to try and solve the unemployment crisis that South Africa faces, an economy is not something that stands still. And we know that particularly in the last 10 years, we've had various events, whether it be the global financial crisis, the fourth industrial revolution, or now the pandemic, which continue to change the landscape of employment and unemployment. I think also, Africa, it's always important to reflect that we must never reduce youth development to a youth unemployment issue, right? And we should never lose sight of the fact that youth development is important. The holistic development of a young person must always be at the forefront of our minds. But that unemployment, while not being a singular challenge, it has so many socioeconomic effects, whether it be poverty or inequality. Youth employment is an outcome of the holistic development of a young person. We must never lose sight of the fact that, even as Miriam said, values and inculcation of values into our young people, that we want to build a country where integrity and honesty and ethics are important. And that comes from mentorship and support to our young people in their journey from being a child to being an adult. If we focus on the conversation today, I think we know, for example, that the economic recovery has been faster than expected. We have seen increases in GDP over the last 3 quarters. We also know, for example, that the social distress grant has ended. And I think a lot of young people had become dependent on that. Out of the 5 million beneficiaries, 2 million were young people. And it doesn't look like the distress relief grant is coming back. The president and the presidency implemented an employment stimulus, and I'm going to talk about that employment stimulus. The first phase ended in around April, and we're getting ready to commence phase 2 of that shortly. But I think we also know from the February budget that National Treasury has made major cuts to expenditure in the country, given the precarious, particularly the debt situation, right? And we're seeing the spillover effect of some of those cuts, for example, in the student protests, which we saw at the beginning of the academic year. I think you saw it as well in the inability to pay for overtime for nurses for vaccine administration over the weekends. I think we also know many young people have faced mental health challenges as a result of the pandemic. Just a little bit of contextualization on what the demographics of young people look like in South Africa. About 20.5 million young people, slightly more men than women. The total unemployment rate, or the unemployment rate of young people, 55% between 15 to 24, 34% for 25 to 34, 64% of young people in urban areas, 32% in rural areas, and 4% on farms. So we also see rapid urbanization of the country, and any youth unemployment plan must speak to that urbanization. What do young people themselves say? Many feel that quality of life has improved in South Africa, that they feel that education standards are better, that they have free education, particularly at primary level. Housing always comes up. I think when we did the 25-year review of government, we found that South Africa had one of the more comprehensive social housing mechanisms globally. Yeah? And I think that plays a big role in positive attitudes towards the country. Young people do feel that in many ways the country is getting better, and that there is a focus on issues and trying to make a change. Negative drivers is that unemployment and jobs and work always ranks at the top of any list of young people in their grievances. The high levels of fraud and corruption, the high levels of crime and violence, and the low or poor basic service deliveries, as well as what young people often feel like is empty promises on behalf of government. When the president entered office, President Ramaphosa, youth unemployment remains an issue that is very close to his heart. And having been in meetings with the president, there has been various measures implemented or in the design of implementation to be able to address the youth unemployment issue. Now, I'm going to touch on these through my presentation, but the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, which was announced in SONA 2020, when we didn't hear the word COVID, focused on 5 priority interventions over the next 5 years to meaningfully address the high rate of youth unemployment. And I'll be unpacking these through the course of my presentation. The Presidential Youth Employment Intervention was before COVID-19, right? And obviously with the impact of the pandemic, there's had to be a broader focus on economic recovery and reconstruction. There's also, and I think this has been an underreported issue in the media, but there's very much a centralization of coordination activities back in the presidency. And this is quite a fundamental policy shift from the 5th administration to the 6th administration, right? So at its core, there's currently 3 processes which are being driven in the presidency. The one is the infrastructure working group as a mass infrastructure rollout, which many countries are using as a response to the pandemic. The other is Operation Vulindlela, where many issues of unblocking are being looked at. So the ease of doing business, the master plan processes, the localization of the economy, and getting the kind of meaningful economic growth that we need to create jobs at scale so that we can absorb the multitude of people and young people into the economy. And the last thing is this focus on an employment stimulus, right? Really driving employment using government's physical base as an opportunity. We've used public employment before through processes like the expanded public works program, the community works program. They've had some level of successes. They've also had failures, which we must learn from. And then I think you'll also see in the media that there's a lot of engagement around social partners, particularly through the NADLAC process. So phase one of the employment stimulus was a direct response to COVID-19, right? And in total, our estimates tell us that that employment stimulus supported about 600,000 livelihood opportunities in the economy. Let's look at some of the programs that supported people and young people. Yeah? The Department of Basic Education employed for 6 months 300,000 young people as teachers' assistants and general assistants, right? It is now the largest public employment program in South Africa, and it was the fastest to reach scale. Young people were recruited through a platform called SAYouth.bobi, the National Pathway Management Network, right? Which meant we used a digital platform for young people to register and for them to be placed across 26,000 public schools in South Africa. The beauty of that is that you recruit in an effective and efficient manner, but even when young people exit from the program, you are able to create a profile for them that lists their skills and experience, and you allow them to be made visible to other opportunities and in particular to other employers. Yeah? There was a strong focus on partnerships, particularly on training on ICT and curriculum support. And our surveys have shown strong support from principals, from teachers, from community. It paid at the national minimum wage, and it's able to reach deep into communities because it goes into 26,000 public schools, which means the spending of those young people is concentrated in local economies, benefiting many small businesses. About 75,000 subsistence farmers were supported through voucher processes through the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. 2,000 young agricultural graduates were there on hand to perform site visits, and there were 130,000 applications. And for the first time, there's now a geospatial database of subsistence farmers in place that can allow us to track agricultural work across the country. In the ECD sector, about 25,000 ECD facilities were supported through the Department of Social Development. There were programs in the Department of Environmental, Forestry and Fisheries, particularly for sand parks, which has suffered massively during the pandemic, particularly from a tourism perspective. There's also been failures, and I think we've always been honest about the failures. I think we saw the crisis at the National Arts Council, where grants were issued way in excess of what the budget was, and that created a very much a self-inflicted crisis. But I think it displayed to us the level of need in the creative arts sector. The National Film and Video Foundation supported about 300 awards to the sector, and I think that's an underreported mechanism. I think particularly we've seen over the last couple of months the amount of South African productions that have appeared on global platforms like Netflix, and the Film and Video Foundation is at the core of supporting the creative arts industry. The global business services sector, where the DTIC supported about 8,000 jobs. And this is a sector which is massively growing in the South African context. Call centers, data processing centers, we're only second behind India in that sector. And it's a sector which is creating jobs, but not only jobs, good, well-paying jobs, particularly for young people. The Department of Public Works appointed about 2,000 young professionals in their Rural Bridges program, and the Department of Cooperative Governance also was able to support young people through their municipal infrastructure grant process. As we move into phase two, the continuing focus will be on employment, particularly public employment, self-employment, game-changing opportunities, and the presidential youth employment intervention. Me being here today, as I sort of move towards conclusion, is not to provide all of the solutions. and some questions that I'm putting out to the forum as well is that I do believe that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought South Africans together. It might not feel like it, and I understand that there's a heavy atmosphere today, but the public employment stimulus is an opportunity to take collaborative approaches to a new level, right? And there's many role players in the wider society that have institutional capacity, they have resources, they have ideas, and they have passion to be able to make a difference. I think we know the role of the private sector in creating more permanent forms and more sustainable forms of employment. And I think we talk the language of partnership, but I don't think we know what sustainable partnership looks like, right? And how do we take partnerships to new levels? I think also is less recognized the role that many non-state actors, particularly at community level, play in creating employment. And they work hard at solving social, environmental, and economic challenges. How do we partner with and better support non-state actors to create work that serves common good in South Africa, right? Which is critical to the pathways of young people in this economy. Some of the things that we'll be implementing in phase 2 looks at things which are game-changing in nature, right? So for example, the broadband conversation is very much relevant, right? And broadband is a game changer because it not only unlocks access to information, it allows a young person to be able to start a business from home. It allows them to participate in a global economy, for example, right? So we're running a program to connect 100,000 marginalized and vulnerable households to last mile broadband services, digital skills. Right now there's 68,000 openings for digital skills opportunities for young people, right? And training for a job in digital skills is not a complex or a hard process which can be undertaken. While many of our initiatives at self-employment have focused on direct enterprise support, right? We believe that there needs to be more ecosystem support for township and rural enterprises. And this looks like upgrade of public infrastructure, or platform economy businesses, the way Sweep South or Kandua has revolutionized self-employment opportunities for domestic workers or for artisans. Yeah? So these are some of the programs that we're undertaking in phase 2 of the employment stimulus. I want to end off by speaking a little bit about the National Pathway Management Network, right? So this is one of the bigger things that the president launched on Youth Day on June 16th this year, right? And I think there's a slight misunderstanding about what the National Pathway Management Network is. So first of all, anybody can register on the National Pathway Management Network on sayouth.mobi, right? But it's not a database. We've had many databases in this country. It's beyond a database, right? Because it's an opportunity for a young person at no cost to themselves, no data costs, to be able to build a profile for themselves, list their skills and experience. But more than that, it's an opportunity to aggregate opportunities into one place for young people so that they're not overloaded with information and unable to know where to start, right? But what the National Pathway Management is also trying to do is to drive system change that identifies barriers that young people face, but also encourages employers to support more inclusive hiring. As we speak now, there's anywhere between 300,000 and to 500,000 entry-level opportunities available for young people. But due to many barriers in the system, we're unable to connect young people to those opportunities. And this is the barrier that the National Pathway Management Network is trying to overcome. It's supported through an inbound toll-free support line, through a Mobi site that's data-free, through a social media sites, through the NYDA, the Department of Employment and Labor, and the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, but also in person. We know that physical support to young people remains critically important, and having contact sites in all 254 local municipalities is key to the delivery of the National Pathway Management Network. As I end off my presentation, I want to focus on one point, and it is to say that many of these schemes are taking us in the right direction. But I wonder, having seen the events of the past few days and the youth unemployment crisis in particular, whether the time has arrived for a state-sponsored universal employment guarantee for young people in South Africa. Similar programs have been implemented in Argentina, and India. Just to give you an example, in Argentina, where participants were asked whether they prefer a basic cash transfer or an opportunity to be able to work for income on an employment guarantee scheme, 90 to 95% of participants said they prefer to work because work is beyond economic activity. It also has close associations with dignity and purpose in life. Thanks, Africa. I'll close off for that.
And Waseem, perhaps I'll start off with your last point. I mean, how would it work in a South African context, do you think, that work guarantee scheme, as you referred to it? Because I agree with the young people generally that if I can get access to a job, I'd rather that than receive a form of a basic income grant, for example.
Yeah, 100%. So here's my perspective, right? If you could take 300,000 young people and place them in public schools in the period of a month, and you got about 800,000 applications in a short piece of time, you're looking at about 10 to 15 young people per public school in South Africa. And they're mainly doing learner support and teacher support for now. But how many other opportunities are there in our public schools, in the nutrition program, in school sports, arts, and culture? That 300,000 can easily be scaled 4 times to 1.2 million young people, right? So I think we look around us, right? And there's no shortage of work to be done in this country. And there's young people who we know are able and willing to be able to do that work. Yeah? I suppose the main challenge is on the physical side, is how would you fund this? Now, our calculations tell us that even if you have to start small, let's start at 25% of young people. So target about 2 million young people in an employment guarantee. You're looking about 25% of the population. You're looking at about 40 billion rand, right? In a country whose national budget is about 2 trillion rand, where do you find 40 billion in the crisis of you need a basic income grant, you need money for free higher education? One is possibly to reconsider our monetary policy in this country and see whether we would be willing to go down the line of increasing a debt ceiling or looking at a central bank to be able to help us fund programs, which we need, right? We need because we're really locked in a crisis. The other, and this is a more difficult conversation, I'd say, is whether we need to solve inequality in this country and whether to give our young people a fighting chance, whether we need to raise the marginal tax rate, right? And it's a very difficult conversation because many taxpayers in this country feel that government wastes their money, that there's way too much corruption. And that's why things like the imprisonment of a former president is important to rebuild trust in the social fabric of society, so that if you have to raise marginal tax rates to be able to support developmental programs, you do so without eroding trust in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sooner sort of bet on a meeting with the finance minister, which is going to be a difficult one in trying to find that 40 billion rand and trying to convince South Africans to give more money to government as far as marginal tax is concerned. What's been the take-up for the network, by the way? I mean, it's intriguing that there are anything between 300,000 and 500,000 entry-level jobs that are not filled when there's so much unemployment in this country.
Yeah, so I mean, there's about 1.2 million young people now registered on the SA Youth platform. So it's scaled pretty fast. About 800,000 of them came through the DBE opportunity process. I'd say there's, using particularly Harambe's strong employment links, there's been strong uptake from the private sector. But where we really need more support is private sector organizations listing their opportunities on the platform. And I think there's been multiple engagements with Business Unity South Africa, Business for South Africa in getting that done. Yeah.
Harambe has been mentioned now for the second time this afternoon. I really would invite you to find them on the internet and just read up about the work that they do. It's actually extraordinary. Unfortunately, we had confirmed a speaker from Harambe to join us this afternoon, and at the last minute had to excuse herself for reasons which we absolutely understood. Parting question for me then, Waseem. The thousands, tens of thousands of opportunities you were listing there that various elements, I suppose, of government were making available to young people as part of the president's stimulus package. Those are short term. I know people who were teachers' assistants for 3 months. And I know teachers who were enjoying the services of those teachers' assistants who are going, I want them to stay on for a little bit longer, because the challenges that the teachers would be facing in managing to teach mathematics to a class of 45 kids, they remain. They don't stop just because the teachers' assistants now have been pulled back and there's no more money made available for it.
100%. Look, the conversation we're having right now with the National Treasury and the Finance Minister is that the program has to become institutionalized on the budget until 2025, right? I still argue it's not going far enough, right? If 10 to 11 billion is supporting 600,000 to 800,000 opportunities, if we're going to shift the needle, we need 4 times that amount to be able to do it, you know. And that's where this conversation needs to go, particularly, I think, between the president and the finance minister, yeah, because we've really got to deal with this unemployment situation. And I don't think young people have necessarily the luxury of time of waiting for institutional reforms, economic growth. And I do think public employment in particular presents an opportunity to address the crisis in the short term.
Waseem, thank you very much. Of course, you'll be staying with us until the end. And if there are any questions you'd like to ask any of our guests, remember to use the chat function on this platform to pose your question, and I'll make sure to get it answered. But let's go on to our third speaker for the day. Kristal Duncan-Williams is a project lead at Youth Capital, and she's here to share the youth perspective on policies and governance systems. Now, Kristal, I've had the opportunity to interview you on my day job, where I get paid a salary. But for those perhaps who don't know what Youth Capital does, can we start there? What is the objective for your organization? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Africa. And I actually have a slide. So if I could go and share, my first slide answers your questions. I'm going to do that. I like having visuals. I think it helps people to focus a little bit instead of just listening to my voice. So what do we do at Youth Capital? So we try to try to focus on 3 key things. We synthesize and distill critical information for action. We build an influential youth-led constituency, and we mobilize decision makers around an action plan. And through these 3 approaches, we try to bring focus to priorities to build momentum for change around shifting the gears on youth unemployment. We really believe at Youth Capital that we haven't been able to address this problem of youth unemployment because young people have been left out of the conversation, number 1. And number 2, we don't have a collective agenda. You know, I think Miriam pointed to a number of very practical solutions, which I love. We need to be more solution orientated and not get bogged down in talking about all of the challenges that we face. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that those solutions are grounded in the realities of what young people face every day, and that we need to all be working towards one common direction. So, Africa, I hope that answers your question.
Go on then to your presentation for this afternoon.
Sure.
To reflect on, I suppose, what young people are thinking about some of the policies that are meant to be determining their future.
Absolutely. So through the work that Youth Capital has done, we obviously, our first point of call was to create this agenda that we think is a section-wide agenda. And through that, we've come up with this 10-point action plan. And I think Waseem started touching on this point that we often speak about youth development as a singular problem of youth unemployment. But we forget that young people are human beings and they live in a world with various challenges, and they journey through life. And getting a job or having a sustainable livelihood is just one point in that entire journey. And if we're going to solve the crisis, we need to support young people throughout their journey, from education through the transition phase when they leave places of learning through into their first work opportunity, and then a sustainable livelihood. And so our 10-point action plan covers all of that. And I'm not going to go into that today, but you can read more about it on our website, which I'll give to you at the end of the presentation. I think what's important here for my focus today is how did we develop the plan? So we looked at research and evidence. We wanted to understand what had worked in South Africa and what hadn't. And we did a lot of desktop research. I did a lot of analysis on existing data set from Stats SA or the NIDS data sets. But then, importantly, we also spoke to young people. So this is obviously pre-COVID, and we were able to travel to 5 to 5 provinces and spoke to over 200 young people in the broad definition of youth between the ages of 15 and 35. And through that, developed the 10-point action plan. But most importantly, we continue to talk to young people. And most of it is obviously online now because of COVID. And we realize that excludes some young people, but we do believe we are being more representative than the traditional model of working with a small group of young people and hoping that they somehow represent the views and experiences of all the youth in South Africa, when we know that South Africa is a diverse place and young people are a heterogeneous group, and we make a mistake when we try to put them all into one box or one category. And so I think this model of how this plan was developed can help us understand how to engage with young people and how do we get young people to drive systemic change at a policy level, which is what I want to chat about today. So in order to do that, we need to understand, how do young people engage? So, if you have conversations with young people, they'll say things like this comment here, which is, I want to engage, but policy documents are lengthy and they're full of jargon. And I mean, even myself, whose job it is to read these policy documents, often I find them boring and complicated, and you have to read it a few times to make sense of it. So I think what gets in the way of young people engaging with these documents is, the ability to read and engage with, often 100-page documents. And then how do they engage with it? So they've read the document. Who do they send feedback to? How do they structure the feedback? Is anybody even going to look at their feedback? And then a network, a young person on their own can feel a bit lost and without agency. But when you connect them into a network of other young people who maybe have connections or experience with doing this kind of work, it bolsters their confidence to be able to engage with that. And what we found, obviously because of COVID, it has strengthened the role of online spaces for activism. And so how do we use online spaces to promote advocacy? So what online spaces can do is they provide a supportive community, especially if you think about a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group. Young people can engage with other young people who are like-minded. Obviously, they've joined the group because they have similar interests. And so there's already, a commonality or something that connects them. And it's an easy way to get information out to young people. That's why fake news spreads so easily. It's because it's easy to just post a link to something or picture or information, but we can use it to actually get information on policies out there and create actionable asks, promote learning, give information to young people on how to campaign and then how to move into a solution space. So like I said, we don't get bogged down in talking about the problems. So how do young people choose to take action online? We know that they share content, they tag friends and organizations, they try to, tweet at decision makers or tag them in their comments, they join Facebook and WhatsApp groups, as I've already mentioned, they'll sign petitions, they'll talk about their own experience. If you ask a question, what has been your experience with getting access to NSFAS funding? You'll get a lot of comments on that thread. And young people know how to use relevant hashtags. And so we know that young people engage in various ways across various social media platforms. But in a South African context, we need to meet young people where they are. And we know that platforms like Facebook and Instagram or Twitter and TikTok are for a very small group of young people. But WhatsApp is the giant in the room, so to speak. And that's largely a data issue in this country. And so I think if we want to talk about how do we get young people to engage with policies in new and innovative and different ways, then we have to start looking at what is available to us. Most young people on WhatsApp, they will have access to WhatsApp bundles, and even the most basic smartphone, allows you to use WhatsApp. So even if connectivity and devices is a restraint, there are obviously young people who don't have access to those things. But the majority of young people in this country, if we look at the stats, have access to at least WhatsApp. And so, using this information, we at Youth Capital, I just wanted to give a practical example, of what we've done. We created a working policy group with Youth Lab, and Youth Lab is a youth policy think tank that's been around for over 8 years. So, are experts in the space, and really had a lot of value to add, and we've learned a lot from them. And we created a group around about the time that lockdown happened last year. So at that time, there was the National Youth Policy 2020 to 2030 that was out for comment. And we created this group as a response to that policy because ourselves and Youth Lab had been in conversation. You know, there were issues with the policy, there were issues with the timeline, there were issues with how they supposedly had engaged with young people. And so we created a lot of noise around that on social media. And then we created a WhatsApp group. And we've termed it the working group on youth policy. And that WhatsApp group, now we're a year and a bit down the line. And what we've seen in that time is, we've engaged with young people on a variety of policies which are relevant to their lives. Like I mentioned, the National Youth Policy, the Integrated Youth Development Strategy, the General Education Certificate. So I know Miriam spoke quite a bit about the grade 9 or the exit certificate. That's the General Education Certificate. It was out for comment last month. Comments had to be in by the 4th of July. And we have submitted comments on that. And we continue to engage on the implementation of these policies through this WhatsApp group. Now, it's a very simple thing. I'm not proposing anything revolutionary here, but I think what's important is that now that, we're a year and 3 months into the WhatsApp group, what we're starting to see is the conversation is no longer led by Youth Lab and Youth Capital. We actually have young people from other youth organizations approaching us and saying, we're interested in commenting on this policy on GBV, on gender-based violence. Could we host a chat? And I think that that's really encouraging. Gender-based violence might not be part of the mandate of Youth Capital's work, but it's obviously of a real concern to young people. And so, we've created a space where young people feel like we can actually take ownership of the space with an issue that's close to our hearts. And there's over 100 people in that WhatsApp group. Anybody can sign on as an individual or as an organization to any of the comments that are submitted through conversations on that WhatsApp group. And I think what's nice for the policymakers who read those comments is we always include direct quotes of young people. So I think, traditionally ways of getting policy inputs were you would have a meeting in a town hall, so you'd be limited by how many people can be in the room. You'd be limited by who knew about it, who got the invite. Usually, if you were part of some organization, you'd be part of it. Whereas this WhatsApp group is open to any young person. And so I think it gives you the ability to include more voices. It gives young people who might feel maybe they don't have agency or maybe they don't know how to engage with policy. They can just be in the WhatsApp group and learn from other people without saying anything. And the hope is eventually that, they will feel equipped enough to engage. And we have, as I've put there, run kind of training on different aspects of policy in the group as well. So I just wanted to, end off my talk this afternoon with a very practical example of how we have shown that in engaging with young people doesn't have to be a complex thing. But it needs to be meaningful. And if you want to engage with young people, then you have to do it from a place of meeting them where they are. And so in conclusion, if we want to stem the crisis of youth unemployment, we need to put young people's lived experiences at the center of a solution. And I think Miriam made this point, this is, a problem that we've sat with for decades. And what have we learned from all of the various things that have attempted to solve this crisis and have failed? Because if it had worked, we wouldn't be in this situation. When have we actually said to young people, this plan that the government's put in place, how did it benefit you? You did an EPWP, Opportunity Expanded Works program, stint for 3 months. How did it help you get a job? Did it help you get a job? Have we had those conversations with young people? And I don't think that we have. We need to drive a collective agenda. So it's fine for every government incentive to have a target of X thousand opportunities, but what does that really mean? And how does that create young people and put them onto a pipeline that they can actually become self-sufficient and create those sustainable livelihoods for themselves? I love that Miriam, pointed to the untapped potential of young people that we really aren't leveraging. We have them in school for 12 years, and then many of them go into a post-school opportunity. And how are we maximizing that contact time with them to equip them for life beyond that? And we need a collective agenda that spans the entire journey of young people, which is where the action plan comes in. There are many people working in the youth development sector, but we don't always talk to each other enough. And so what we need to do is create spaces for collaboration where we can build on our strengths and learn from our weaknesses so that we can make sure that we implement solutions and scale solutions that we know work. And if we know something doesn't work, then we need to stop that thing and try something else. I think often we get so wrapped up in carrying on with something, even when it's clear that it's failed, that we waste a lot of money and a lot of time on things that don't work and will never work. And most importantly, we need to bring all of this to young people. And as I said, meet them where they are, whether that's a WhatsApp group or the soccer field or wherever it is. We need to meet young people where they are and find ways to really engage with them and create space for them at the table, not in a tokenistic way, not to invite them to an event and give them 5 minutes to speak, but to really make them part of the entire process of policy making and decision making. Young people are tired of talk shops, and we want real action. And that's what we keep hearing from young people. So what if Youth Capital has this action plan? How does it translate into meaningful change for young people? And I think we need to keep working on that and coming back to that.
What's been very, very exciting to hear, Kristal, is the fact that there is a youth population in South Africa, if you like, that is willing to engage with these very important issues, because local government elections are coming up, for example, hopefully on the 27th of October, should the Mosaneke inquiry deem that it's possible for us to have a free and fair election in a pandemic of the nature. And one of the conversations we're going to be having is that young people are generally apathetic, right? They're not wanting to engage politically in such matters. But I love how Youth Capital has found a way of engaging, as you say, in the spaces where they exist already, in order for them to engage with, quite frankly, heavy, dense reading of policy document that will shape their lives in the future. Thank you very much for your presentation. Kristal Duncan-Williams, project lead at Youth Capital. Now, someone who's doing something in this space in a way that is innovative is a lecturer and consultant in innovation. Joining us via the internet from Riebeek Castile, right here in the Western Cape, is Bas van Kampen. Bas, a very good afternoon and welcome to, I almost said the show, welcome to this platform.
No, thank you for being here. It was really amazing to listen to all the people. I've learned a lot. I also, from time to time, do not really agree with them, which is what is all about the discussion after all. I think, yes, we do need a lot more money. I don't think it's going to come from the government. It is going to come from business and industry, which obviously should be facilitated by government. And on the other hand, any business or industry which leads to an unbalanced richness, let's put it that way, I'm very much against that. So I'm a kind of a socialist capitalist, I think, or the other way around. If I could ask Terrin to start up the presentation. Innovation is a strange animal, because even if you do take innovation as such, and a strange animal which is totally without rules, but on the other hand, it also listens to rules. As a matter of fact, if you don't follow certain steps, you are probably going to end up with the 10% or the 90% which is not successful, where as innovation goes, only 10% is successful. So what are those rules? I'm not going to use my 10 minutes to give them all, but there's some important ones. And one of them is that it is about partnership, not just in acting, but also in thinking. Why does it go wrong so often? Because people's ambitions are not outspoken enough. They do not communicate sufficiently. And what's worse, they do not communicate sufficiently with themselves. Because within yourself in decision making, and please read Kahneman about this, he's a Nobel Prize winner on this subject, you have two systems. One is for your thinking fast, very much on, oh, I know what this is, I've seen it before, blah, 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 blah. And the other one is thinking slow, rethinking whether that is the right way to go. And that also ties in with the participation and the partnership with others. To look around, what do you like, what do you think is nice, what is the mentality that you can find? Obviously, any innovation partnership should be based on the content, what it's about, on trust. Do you really trust each other? And can you trust each other? Mutual interest, mutual ambition, if you like. Energy is very important. There's nothing worse than a lazy partner, I can tell you that. But also resilience, because even although you may agree a clear pattern of steps, it may well be that it doesn't work that way. All of a sudden something goes wrong, or it is different from what you expected. Then you don't give up. You go back and say, okay, fine, let's retrace where we've been and let's try again. And it sounds simple, but we so often seem to forget. I'm relatively new in this country, as you understand, and one word I think is not really part of the vocabulary is de-escalation. You do something wrong, okay, I'll show you that I can do better. And by that, you start a kind of discussion which may not be terribly fruitful. If I can, go to what could help there is a little bit of lateral thinking, because that really helps create the creation of something new. Because after all, more of the same, what does it provide? Yeah, more of the same. We've always done it this way. Why should we change it? You know, we all know those remarks. And that almost is a sort of denial of change. And whether we like it, we're in a situation of change, or whether we like it or not. And yet it creates a safe reference. So also there is a balance between your new thinking and your old thinking. The same holds true for a funding perspective, because strange as it may seem, funders don't really often do this because they're so charitable or because an NGO wants them to do it. They are easier in their funding if you can show that what you're doing is going to be profitable, at least self-sustainable, manageable, and emotionally correct. Let me give you an example. One of the projects I'm involved in is a new cancer medication. It is pretty revolutionary. The university is involved. It's very difficult because it needs to be registered. It costs a lot of money. And of course, it being new and botanically based, the oncologists, they think it's terrible. Unless and until we met an oncologist and her mother had just died of the sort of cancer this medication works for. And all of a sudden, she wasn't that throwing it away. She was actually interested. What could it have done for her mother, for her involvement? So emotion, don't forget, always plays an incredible role. So what we're asking people to do is to find a combination of logical stuff, of unusual stuff, but also of delight. I love to do this. It is a challenge. Can I do that? And what we combine is scientists. We have a problem not only in South Africa, but yes, in South Africa, that we have brilliant scientists who do marvelous stuff, their PhDs, but then it stops. It's not connected to taking it further. They've been trained to be scientists, not to be entrepreneurs. So that goes for some doctors as well. We have a Dutch company commercializing African science because there is so much of it and there's so little funding. We have a company called Steel Pure, which is essential oils and taking that further, also for medical purposes. And what I'd like to talk about today specifically is Goed Gedacht. Goed Gedacht is basically a farming education system. This is the Goed Gedacht headquarters in Riebeekkasteel. It looks pretty nice, as you can see. I would like to be trained there as well, that's for sure. And what you think of when you talk about training is probably this: people well equipped under trees, picking olives and making sure that olive trees grow well, etc., etc. But you may not perhaps think about this. This is what we call vertical farming. This particular thing has been invented by a South African farmer who used to study at Northwest University. He is Hendrik Taljaard, now farming in Mpumalanga. And what you see here is bags with soil, and we know exactly what soil goes in there and which soil fits which type of crops. But at the same time, we also find out what the bag material should be made of, which is pretty different for the sort of crop and the sort of irrigation. So why is this important, we feel? For a number of reasons. First of all, if you look at the quality of the leaves, these cabbage leaves and lettuce leaves have come up from a bag, if you like, just a couple of minutes ago, random. So you can see the quality of the leaves. There are no fungi, there are no insects, there are no, well, things that you don't like about it. And what's more, the taste is incredibly good. So if we look at the possibilities which these people, these are our students who are actually working with this, are looking at, what's in it for us? It's more sustainable because we have a controlled soil, we have a controlled environment, we have a longer shelf life of for the products. And I mean, I don't mean a little bit longer, but a lot longer. We have a food security and food certainty because the yields, if you compare it to ordinary farming, are so much higher that I don't even dare to mention the percentage, but a lot. We can apply it in small ways, in big or bigger ways. We can apply it for urban farming. We can apply it for small holdings and for community partners, because per se, it is not very difficult. It's only difficult if you really want to upscale it. You can, and that makes it profitable. I mean, we could even put a container on the parking lot of a mall and have it equipped as a garden where people can buy groceries or what have you. So it is small business potential. It also creates opportunities to do different sort of tooling, because we need, for instance, I'll give you one example. We're developing small pellet guns to shoot the seedlings into the bags. That needs, those are not existent, so they need to be made, manufactured. We can go totally off the grid, not just for the rotation and for the irrigation, but also for light. Not just, you know, something which is for the future. We do it now. We can have actually a small solar panel which will look after, say, 3 to 4 bags. We have more variety and a bigger number of jobs. We could add in other academic purposes, i.e. seed propagation, essential oil herbs for medical and cosmetics. That's why it's so important that it's controlled. But also hydrogen energy for communities, which is another new South African invention. Nothing's been done with that. The thing, I think the essential thing for us is that we combine things, combine compatibilities and combine inventions with applications which may at first sight not be so directly related. But once you dive into it, you see that those relations almost present themselves. And as far as Goed Gedacht itself is concerned, we reach out and scale up. We have about 2,000 household gardens, about 25 schools we work with. We do our workshops for tooling, but also for programming school, etc., in 6 pop centers. We work together with 70 community farms and small holdings. We're setting up 100 or so green economy businesses. We have a fundraising program, and around now, or perhaps next month, I don't know, but the total people we reach and we reach out with and we help are about 30,000. Of course, I understand that figure-wise, that may not seem much when you heard the figures which the previous speakers mentioned. However, this is mainly the Western Cape, and we can go a lot further within the Western Cape, that's for sure. So it sounds nice, but what I really like about it, sorry, is just go back one, is that what we're into is creating a belief, the belief that you can do it. If you look at the picture and you see the guy on the right in the white t-shirt, he's almost hidden behind the bubble. But look at the guy, the young guy, holding the sticks, and look at his face. He believes that he's done something marvelous, and he did. Wow, can I do that? And that's the feeling we want to give to our learners, and which we try to achieve. So thanks very much for your attention.
Bas, it really sounds absolutely exciting. In the Western Cape, of course, agriculture is an important economic sector, and to bring this kind of innovation to it, that's going to be impacting on the number of not only young people, but the households, the individuals you listed, is really amazing. You did mention at the beginning that you are new to South Africa. What did you to Riebeek Kasteel and to Goede Gedacht and the farm that you're working in?
Okay, it's all my wife. She used to work in Southern Africa for a long time as a jungle guide, and she said when we met up again in Holland, by the way, she said, well, okay, you know, if we want to stay together, there's one condition, we're going to South Africa. So that's when I started to look around and fell in love with the country and the people, and so here I am.
We like your wife very much.
I'll tell her. Thank you.
The science, the research, the innovation even that is present in this country, is that story told widely enough internationally, do you think?
No, not at all. No, it's something we come across time and time again, that people are actually amazed that sorry for the word, emerging country has such brilliant scientists, had such brilliant inventions, and it is, once we you know, in science there's of course there's one little thing which helps all along, that 1 and 1 is 2 in almost every country of the world. Okay, some exceptions, but okay. So they immediately understand the how valuable the research is and how good the ideas are. But it needs to be told a lot more. Yes, unfortunately, the public seems to listen more to what goes wrong in any society than what goes right.
And then a parting question from me. You started up your presentation by commenting on some of the previous speakers, where you believe that a lot of the funding for these opportunities we're talking about, where young people can really find value, purpose, use, a future, that funding should come from the private sector. Why do you say that?
Well, I think that if you just basically take an international view, that you will see that governments are very useful institutions in that they should facilitate an infrastructure, they should facilitate education, they should facilitate business development, but they are never going to actually make sufficient money to make that sustainable. So there has to be this balance between industry and business on the one hand, and government on the other hand, whereby we say, okay, fine, if we approach it this way, we will pay more taxes, but who cares? If you're profitable, it's okay to pay taxes. We have a little philosophical group in Holland, which is called the Waterlanders, and they are basically journalists, professors, scientists, and they have this very simple idea, say, okay, let's make as much money as we possibly can, but then let's also agree that we allocate it in the right way. So we help poverty, we help people fight their own poverty, etc., etc. That's where I come from.
Very inspirational indeed. Now, Erica and Nichola will help me reflect on all the presentations that we've heard here today in a moment, because you've given us very, very much food for thought, all of the speakers this afternoon. Thank you for your time. But perhaps to celebrate a little bit of innovation in a space of health. We've been surviving a pandemic and having to contend with a new normal. And Iyeza health founder Sizwe Nzima used to travel by bicycle to deliver medication from the clinic to his grandmother. And from there stemmed an idea to create a specialist health company committed to changing the face of public health in South Africa. Its roots in the health logistics sector, helping ordinary people across the chronic medical care that they need to live a healthy and fulfilling life. Its philosophy is that doing good is good business, and that adding value to people's lives has more than just financial rewards.
My name is Sizwe Nzima, and I deliver chronic medication to chronically ill patients. My grandparents struggled to get their chronic medication because of the long queues that they had to sit in at the clinics, as well as the hours that they had to travel. I realized that there were many more like them. I only had a bicycle, so I started delivering medication directly to people's homes. The first delivery was hectic, so they thought I was some kind of drug dealer, and I was taken in by the cops. I managed to explain to them what am I trying to do and how this would help the clinic in terms of decongesting the number of people. I've employed my staff according to the areas they live in and the areas they deliver in. It's not sophisticated technology, it's just local knowledge. Now we're doing more than 2,800 patients. Where there's a need, South Africans will always make a plan to help one another. I've been to other countries, they are very boring.
We like him very much. A lovely, lovely organization that does fantastic work. And Nichola Walker-Woodard is a Deputy Consul General for the Dutch Consulate here in Cape Town. And Erica Elk, of course, is the Group CEO of the Craft and Design Institute. Baz was just talking about innovation. Sometimes innovation is as simple as that. It's a bicycle and using local knowledge.
Indeed, Africa. I think that Sizwe is certainly inspired me the most. We've had some amazing speakers, but I think having regard to a recent World Bank analysis of the South African economy, there's been a clear indication that in addition to increased economic activity, which Miriam spoke about, there's also a need for increased self-employment. Yeah. And I think that we haven't probably touched enough on that today, but we certainly will in our upcoming festival. Hey, Erica, indeed. And I think that we've catched a glimpse there with Sizwe in terms of the resilience and the creativity and the innovation, as Bas mentioned, that is so needed and necessary in this within South Africa. So. Yes, indeed inspirational, and I am particularly excited about the opportunities, those 6 million opportunities that Miriam spoke about, that are present not only in the formal sector, but also in the self-employment sector. South Africa apparently has only 10% self-employment at this stage, compared to its contemporaries, such as Brazil and Mexico, Turkey, who are sitting at 30%. So there's so much opportunity. And I'm excited to see some more Sizwes filling that gap as we move on.
What has been quite heartwarming today is that the focus has been on the opportunities. It's easy, is it not, to just list all the chronic situations that we're having to deal with, and supposed to saying, wait a minute, there are opportunities here. Here they are, and let's find those low-hanging fruit that we can pluck right now.
Indeed. I just hope that the journey that the pathway that Miriam spoke about will include a new attitude towards entrepreneurship in terms of making it happen. And I'm sure that with what South Africans have to offer in terms of creativity, innovation, resilience, that there is certainly hope there.
Erica, you equally inspired, aren't you?
I am, and I kind of wanted to say a couple of the same things as Nikki, but I think I mean, I think coming into the conversation today more than other days because of what's been going on around us, the sort of sense of maybe despondency, of crisis, of how huge the problem is however we name what's been going on over the last 4 days or 5 days, year or whatever it is, they're incredibly complex problems and challenges that have been with us. I think that all the conversations we've been having are also, everyone has started off by saying this situation existed pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of the commentary about what's happening over the last couple of days, whether it's criminality or kind of third force or just hungry people taking the opportunity to get some food, it's the culmination. I mean, we are where we are now because of everything that's happened before. But so having arrived at that place, and also just with the title, the youth unemployment crisis, is that actually just this conversation and getting the information from people and different perspectives from people, that for me also has just turned on its head, that we actually should be talking about youth development and the opportunities that exist when we kind of disaggregate the figure from the 74% unemployed, and we look at what are the different segments in that picture, and then what are some of the solutions around it.
Now, Nichola has already indicated that going into the festival in September, and we'll share the dates in a moment, youth employment, self-employment opportunities is going to be one of the areas that we need to focus on. What else do you think from today we can take forward through dialogue, exchange, creatively and otherwise, but also hopefully those who are attending this conversation, that they can say, well, wait a minute, that's where I can tap in and this is how I can contribute?
So I think some of the sort of key words that came up were around, I think, in a way, building the ecosystem. So thinking about the ecosystems and all the people in the ecosystems and how we partner. So that's kind of bringing together the public sector, private sector, individual citizens. Big narrative I have going on in my head is what are we doing each as individual citizens, not just as our forms of organization, about the crises and some of the challenges. I think collaboration, partnerships is a big theme that we should look at. And then, of course, we've got to come back always to the innovation, design, and this underlying theme of digital inclusion. So I think that also was a big thing coming through around how the Mobi site and then the practical PESP opportunity together gets youth onto a platform, that youth are digitally enabled, they are using WhatsApp, etc. So that's a lot of value that I think that we can carry on talking about.
No, for sure. Now, Nikki, a couple of dates that we do need to mention. Firstly, our next dialogue, Creative Exchange Dialogue, is going to happen on the 25th of August.
Correct.
What are we discussing then?
We will be looking at access to water and sanitation. So we've reflected on access to healthcare, we've reflected on access to food security, we've looked at building an economic resilience, particularly within the youth today. And the fourth key element, and all these elements will be addressed again during the festival in 4 pillars, will be access to water and sanitation and what COVID has laid bare to, again, existing systems and issues, but what innovation is out there and what can be done. So something to look forward to, 25 August.
And then in September, when we have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 days of a festival, we are going to announce the save the date for the moment. And of course, details, programs, venues, because the nature of how things are now is that we need to have a hybrid, right? We'll have hopefully some people in the room who can engage and participate, and then many people who are going to be watching pretty much like you are today. What are those dates in September that you should be saving?
So let me get them right. So the 20th to the 23rd of September, 4 days, and details to follow.
details to follow. We're actually coming up with a lovely program of how we can use this kind of setup and platform for some of the day, and then there are 2 other sections of the day where there really will be robust engagement, because ultimately, and it was Kristal from Youth Capital who said that there are many organizations that are playing in this space that often do not communicate with each other enough, and the series of dialogues primarily is that to inspire and to expose you to what is already happening, so that you can see how you and your organization can tap into that and really amplify and maximize the potential for any of the design-led solutions that we are discussing here. So the 25th of August is going to be the next date where we're looking at the topic of water and sanitation, which is a real issue in this country. And of course, the dates 20th to the 23rd of September, the 4 days when you need to set aside for what would be an amazing festival. I'd like to thank all of my speakers this afternoon, Dr. Miriam Altman, for really setting the scene and repurposing our conversation into focusing on the opportunities as opposed to just being stuck on the challenges around youth unemployment and the crises that is around it. The CEO of the National Youth Development Agency, Waseem Carrim, for really laying out what opportunities already exist and what is being done, particularly by government, and where we need to go to. And I wish you all the best of luck in discussions with government regarding unlocking a few more billions of rands in order to realize those opportunities. Kristal Duncan-Williams, your work at Youth Capital is essential. To have young people engaging deeply on matters of policy, we cannot state how important that is, because ultimately they need to drive the conversation into realizing the solutions to their challenges. And then, of course, what inspiration from Bas van Kampen, lecturer and consultant in innovation. And can we please just send a bowl of chocolate to Mrs. van Kampen for getting him to Cape Town? Most importantly, thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We certainly hope that we have brought about some inspiration in a time in South Africa when there's a lot of darkness. We will overcome this. Good will triumph. The rule of law will reign supreme, and we will go back to building the economies and creating those opportunities as we need them. I'll see you on the 25th of August.